Dear students, I welcome you all to this lecture on Plato's views on women and guardianship. The main objectives of this lecture are to outline Plato's views on women throughout his writings, to understand his views on gender equality, to determine the role of women in his ideal state, to highlight the inconsistencies about women in his political thought, and to gauge its relevance for contemporary feminist movements. Very few philosophers have presented women in a positive light within the canon of Western political thought. Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, J.S. Mill, and Plato are among the rare exceptions. It is clear from literature that political activity and masculinity were intricately interwoven in the ancient Greek language of political life. This thought is rife with misogynistic traditions which project a direct opposition in male-female interactions and establish the superiority of the male over the female. The Greek political imagination then centers on a standard of manly courage which holds that brave citizens show their patriotism by pursuing honor and fame rather than peace or justice. This standard derives its depth from a comparison with the idealized life of women who toil in silence and seclusion much like slaves. Thus, it should come as no surprise that several thinkers in the 20th century, mostly women, have made an effort to counter the imbalance and disparity between men and women in Western political theory. In order to understand the root of the evident misogyny bias that pervades Western political thought and to find alternatives, modern philosophers such as Susan Moller-Okin have turned to these Greek authors. It is generally agreed that Plato was an early opponent of a political life dominated by men. It is possible to interpret Plato as advocating for a tangible improvement in women's status in comparison to the social standards of his time. There is no theory of individual rights that forms the foundation of his critique of Greek misogyny. Instead, it lies in his serious doubts about the idea that the ideal human life is one of a dedicated citizens that is primarily concerned with the needs of the ideal city. This information helps to clarify and place the position of women in Plato's philosophy, particularly in the Republic. In Plato's earlier works, women are portrayed as helpless, sentimental, and unworthy. Women are treated poorly and are restricted to the home, where they are depicted as seductresses. When women do make an appearance, it is only to arouse men's sensual desires. This happens even as the establishment of the just city is based on a detachment from the body. In his discussion of old age, Cephalus focuses particularly on the sexual desire for women. In Glaucon's ideal city, women appear as courtesans in the middle of a list of delights that includes spices, perfumes, incense, and cakes, referring to womanly attire or decorations, or as wet nurses. The political content in the early books of Plato is far from inclusive of women. Rather, they are portrayed as the instigators of eroticism that needs to be suppressed both among the founders as well as the guardians of the just city. However, The majority of his references turn positive as soon as Plato reaches Book 5 of the Republic. He makes the daring suggestion for women to be included in the guardian class of his just city right at the start of Book 5. For this, he goes back to understanding the barriers to justice. Through Socrates, he presents ideas of reform that are so radical in nature that they have to necessarily attract criticism from the society. The first proposes equality of men and women, while the second would outlaw private property and marriage for the ruling class of the society. The third proposition addresses the nature of rule, stating that either kings must become philosophers or philosophers must become kings. Plato presents the female as the equal of the male in all species, but he does so very hesitantly. He ignores and trespasses his previous depiction of the female in order to arrive at this equation. He desexualizes her and shreds her of any unique erotic attraction or purpose. By doing this, he disregarded the idea that had motivated his initial pursuit of justice. One of the reasons for this redefining of the equation between men and women is the fact that women are indispensable to men. It is because, in absence of a proper training for women, they will end up destroying the men on whom the city has spent so much time and training. Furthermore, Plato suggests that the calmness of women is necessary to balance the aggressive traits of men that are developed during the training for combat. As he puts it, humanity is a discrete mixture of masculinity and femininity. He continues by saying, we must not forget the importance of feminine qualities to the warrior class, even as we prepare to meet the philosopher guardians. Because the philosopher needs the calmness of a woman too. Like the woman of Plato's city is denuded of her apparent attributes, the philosopher must also deprive himself of all such bodily attributes so as to perform his function. This change in Plato's perspective of women corresponds to the social and political climate of his time and place. In Greek society at that time, women did not receive enough recognition. They were socially irrelevant and politically powerless. Put concisely, they were just a little above the slaves, and Plato aimed to uplift them to a substantial level. The marginalization of women in Western political theory is an established fact. Susan Moller-Okin points out that no political philosopher, barring Mill and Plato, struggled to find a way to give women their rightful status in the society. She states that certain assumptions made by political theorists regarding the family and its role in society are incompatible with the idea that women are equal to men. As Engels and Plato did, Okin considers family to be the root cause of gender inequality. She also criticized John Rawls' idea of justice precisely for missing the role of family in exacerbating injustices in the society. Women are not entirely written about in negative terms by Plato. There are a lot of uplifting remarks regarding women's equality with men. For example, Plato frequently challenges the widespread belief in ancient Greece that the greatest moral teachers were Athenian men Homer, or the male philosophers of the Republic. Instead, whenever he talks about his teachers, he makes sure to make a reference to women. According to Plato, women's education would follow the same rules that apply to men's education. He explains this by using the example of dogs. He contends that dogs, both male and female, are not kept apart from one another and that they share equal rights to stand guard and go hunting. He believes that both men and women in the positions of government should experience the same thing. The only thing that separates them, he claims, is our perception of males as stronger and females as weaker. He implies that women must receive equal education by learning the same subjects as their male guardians, whether it is music, gymnastics, the art of war, or anything else. This is important for them to be able to perform the same tasks as men. He asserts that in preparing a woman to be a guardian, then we won't prescribe one kind of education for women guardians and another for the men, because their natures are the same. It follows that women with the requisite qualities must be chosen to live and guard together with men of like qualities, since they have the necessary competence and are naturally kin. In carrying out the functions of the state, he does not differentiate between men and women. He restates this by saying that sex cannot be criterion in appointments to government positions. No office should be reserved for a man just because he is a man or for a woman just because she is a woman. All the capabilities with which nature endows us are distributed among men and women alike. Hence, women will have the rightful opportunity in every task, and so will men. As guardians of the state, then, women and men are naturally the same. In addition to his views on gender equality, Plato supports a community of women or wives and children. He states that no man in the guardian class is allowed to have a personal wife. Within a communal system, men and women would coexist. The sharing of women and children is unquestionably the source of the state's greatest good. As he states, all the women shall belong to all the men, and that none shall cohabit privately, that the children should also be raised in common, and no child should know its parents nor the parent its child. Every male and female will live together and share meals. He claims that the needs of nature would ensure that they would mate as well. He says the guardians have no right to possess land or any other kind of private property, nor should they reside in private homes. If they were to be true guardians, however, they would receive wages for their work as guardians from funds contributed by other citizens, and they would spend the funds jointly. He claimed that doing this would help them even more to faithfully carry out their responsibilities. They would have similar beliefs and goals when it came to running the shared homes. And they would share pleasure and pain to the furthest possible extent. To put it briefly, they ought to share everything. Plato's philosophy shows that he also supports polygamy. According to him, a good man should be married to more women than others, as he will be more actively pursued for romantic relationships. He states that the goal of this is to raise as many children as from the guardian's seed. Plato advocated arbitrary sexual relationships between members of the guardian class in addition to endorsing polygamy. He makes it very clear when he says, "We shall permit men past their prime to form liaisons with whomever they wish. The woman will have the same freedom." Even though it sounds straightforward, Plato endorsed indiscriminate mating between men and women and forbade men from having personal wives, which goes against the interests of the very people he claims to be defending, that is, women. He also approved abortion because he wanted to keep the city's population under control, as he suggested stringent limitations on the population and the number of marriages. Plato makes an effort to free women from oppression in Book 5. He leaves a lot of room for interpretation, exhibits varying opinions, and generates inconsistencies in doing so. Mostly in his philosophy, men are defined in a way that detracts from their sexuality, while women are defined mostly in terms of sexuality. Men are mind and spirit, women are body and sex. All other activities in life stem from this division of each gender. Woman creates man and man creates the world. Woman is concrete, need-driven, whereas man is conceptual, active and human. It is important to remember that women in the Greek tradition are private people. They are not a part of the community, they belong to the private sphere. Women remain inside their houses. Regardless of the political environment, they carry out their duties privately. Due to their natural tendency of child rearing, they have historically avoided politics. Though she needs the security that the city provides, the female lives apart from the political world and satisfies her erotic desires without regard to the needs or demands of the city. In a nutshell, the woman is useless in the real world of politics. With this perspective, if women are allowed to enter the political sphere, they have the potential to create conflicts. This is the general perception about women in Greek tradition, which is noted in Plato's works as well. However, in Book 5, when she becomes part of the political society, Plato attempts to make public everything that was previously private, including sex. Thus, in the process of being politicized, the woman is brought out of her natural habitat. As evident, Plato's treatment of women seems to be inconsistent. Although women are permitted to join the ruling class, Plato states that they will always be inferior to men. At times, when the characters are having a conversation in the Republic, he overlooks or forgets that there are female guardians present. As Saxon House correctly points out, there are more direct criticisms of women in the Republic. For example, according to Plato, women are more prone to grief than men are. They enjoy multifarious and multicolored things, like children do, and they are the reason behind the breakdown of the different political systems discussed in Book 8. While Book 5 talks of equal participation in the city's governance, common meals, and common education, the equality and freedom between the sexes is what characterizes the city, degenerating into anarchy and tyranny in Book 8. It appears that Plato only saw gender equality in relation to governance. He constantly repeats his belief that women are weaker than men. For example, he does not forget to remind us that women are the weaker of the two sexes, even though he states that men and women should hold equal positions in government and appointments. He emphasizes that one is weaker and the other stronger, even as he affirms the equality of men and women in their roles as state guardians. He assigns women fewer demanding tasks owing to their weakness. In other words, he only assigns household chores to women. He says explicitly that women are more confident and skilled at weaving and baking cakes and boiling vegetables. Plato overlooks the biological characteristics unique to women. Without a doubt, a woman's ability to bear children surpasses that of a man of any species. Even the least skilled women are better at it than any man. It is acknowledged by Plato that the male covers while the female bears. However, he chooses to undercut this distinction rather than thinking through its implications. The minimal role of a mother after giving birth is to nurse her child at scheduled times. Part of what makes women weaker than men in Plato's Republic is this downplaying of the female's reproductive role. Saxon House notes that her innate contribution to the city's survival via the next generation's procreation is disregarded. Plato takes away the woman's unique skill set by making her engage in the combat activities of the male warriors and later the philosopher rulers. In Plato's ideal state, women lose sight of their sexual and bodily nature and are reduced to the status of second class, nearly irrelevant citizens. The family system is also another example of a contradiction in Plato's thought. Plato acknowledges the role of familyhood, father, mother, and children, while supporting the community of wives and children. Furthermore, when the woman becomes the property of the entire city following the ceremony, one is left wondering what is the point of marriage and family. It should be stated that according to Plato, a man's and a woman's marriageable age differs. Men should begin having children at around 30 and continue until they are approximately 55, whereas women should begin at about 20 and continue until they are 40. In this instance too, equality between men and women is not recognized. One of Plato's biggest inconsistencies relates to the art of war. Qualifications to the initial proposals for equality emerge when Glaucon talks about women's actual involvement in combat. Should the women join in their campaigns on the front line or in the rear? That is, either to frighten the enemy or just exist as a reserve army for times of need. All this will make the city even more invincible. He says this after describing an army made of brothers, fathers, and sons. He doesn't seem willing to give women full equality during combat. When he grants men the privilege of more frequent lovemaking with women as a reward for their courage in battle, he blatantly illustrates the inequality between the sexes. In this way, he treats women as nothing more than commodities to be enjoyed by the male guardians as a prize. What, therefore, is the cause of the Republic's inconsistent treatment of women? The reason for the apparent inconsistency is that we are posing the incorrect question to Plato, which is, do you think women are the equal of men or not? This question did not form a part of his philosophical reflections. Further, according to Saxon House, the woman depicted by Plato in books 5 and 6 of the Republic serve as both symbols of the philosopher and a representation of the private life against the public, which is associated with conflict, death, and war. She creates a logical system of comparisons between male and female roles in public and private life. Female as a philosopher, private, peace, play, and life. Male as a guardian, citizen, death, war, and spirit. Solkever contends that rather than being merely antagonistic, this opposition expresses tension and interdependence. For Plato, the question of the relative capacities of the two genders is not the centrality of the relationship. These are merely symbols for the distinct, mutually reinforcing opposites that form the basis of his criticism of Greek politics, philosophy, and civic culture. It is a fundamental truth that women's role in bearing and raising children is traditionally associated with their status as solitary, confined individuals in the home. The feminine is generative, she gives birth and signifies the start of a project, though it need not end there. In Plato's Republic, this generative role is disregarded. Plato's forcing of women into politics shifts her focus from the generation of life to one of death, since politics in the Republic is associated with war and death as a result. But we must acknowledge and not lose sight of the historical context in which Plato wrote the Republic, a time when women were marginalized and denied social status. Socrates and Plato were revolutionary men as a result. They opposed the Greek traditions established status quo. They observed that ignorance, arrogance, irrationality, and the enslavement of women dominated both the government and the society in Athens. They sought to overthrow these governments and establish a new one that would be led by wisdom in the spirit of brotherhood, humility, reason, as well as complete emancipation of women. They desired a new and a better order, equality between the sexes and justice among the population were to guide this new order. While Socrates made the ultimate sacrifice to establish a new society, Plato used the Republic as the main arena for testing this new system. In conclusion, we must consider the setting in which Plato's Republic should be read. It can be difficult and unrealistic to find a feminist in a society that flourished thousands of years ago, particularly if the culture is steeped in patriarchy. Rather than serving as a reflection or exaltation of Greek opinion, on the whole, Plato is best understood as a critic. Despite his judgmental opinions of women, Plato was a radical in his day who was more concerned with making a substantial change in the status of women by freeing them from social oppression. With this, we conclude today's lecture. Hope you benefited from listening to it. Thank you.